Did it, the books, the bit it, the books, the did it, the books, books.
All right. Welcome back to I'll Read It Eventually. Today, I have a second update on my Shop the Shelf challenge. I have two whole stacks of books here that I am not going to be reading all the way through. I will confess some of them I have not really even started. And then there are a couple that don't quite fit into that category, either of those categories. So I guess I'll start there. Um, and we'll go from there. So the first three are books that I actually have gotten a better copy of, I guess I would say. Um, so the first, these are all books I would actually suggest that everyone read. So these are not books that I'd be like, yeah, this isn't that great. I'm not going to finish it. I have read all of these books, these first three, and they're awesome. They're great. I would say all of them are 5 stars. So these are a little odd in that regard. The first one is Voltaire's Candide. Um, Voltaire is a 19th or sorry 18th century social critic, Frenchman, and really took some stabs at contemporary philosophy, at religion, especially organized religion in the form of Roman Catholicism. Um, was a leading light in sort of the I guess you would say the ferment which eventually leads to the French Revolution. I don't think that he would have called himself a revolutionary, but he was certainly critical of basically all the structures of French society at the time. And so Candide is the story of a young man. Excuse me, sorry. Um, and he's sort of this hapless guy who's sort of bumbling through life, and um, horrible things keep happening around him. For example, he has an affair with a woman in the castle near where he lives, and then he gets kicked out of that town, and then the castle gets sacked, and the woman gets killed, and it's just this horrible thing. And then he joins the army for a little while, and there's thousands of people slaughtered on the battlefield. And then he survives that, but barely, and he finds himself in Portugal, in the city of Lisbon, and there's this massive earthquake, and all these people die. It's a real historical event. Um, and so, like, all the world around him is terrible. But he has this tutor whose name is Dr. Pangloss, and Dr. Pangloss keeps telling him, hey, man, everything's okay, though, because you live in the best of all possible worlds, which is something that the philosopher Leibniz believed. I forget Leibniz's first name, but German Jewish philosopher at the same time as Voltaire, who argued that we live in the best of all possible worlds. And so Voltaire's kind of taking stabs at that. He's taking stabs at religion, and ultimately, um, the book has this. I don't remember if it's a refrain or if it just shows up. I think it's twice, which is cultivate your garden. In other words, you can't solve all the problems of the world, but there is a very real sense in which you should be concerned with the immediacy of your life and doing what is right and good in the immediacy of your life. A lot of things I don't agree with Voltaire on. For instance, he doesn't believe in God. Um, but all of his points are well delivered and well taken. So I'm getting rid of this. I actually like this edition a lot. It's a Signet Classic, but I recently procured a modern library hardback of this, and so I'm going to let this one go. So, great book, Candide by Voltaire. The second one, this might be my favorite book, which is A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. This is the first classic novel that I actually made myself read. I read this in high school and did not like it at all, or didn't enjoy the experience at all. But then I got to college the following year, and I was like, my teacher really liked that book, and there were a couple pages where I thought it was okay. I'm going to read it again. And so I read this particular copy again. You probably can't see. It's annotated. I don't really like annotating most of the time, but I annotated this one parts of this one. And the second time reading it, I thought it was the most incredible thing I'd ever read. So, just completely changed the way that I looked at classic literature. It's one of the reasons why I read classic literature at all, because um, this demonstrated to me why some things are classic literature. So this is just like a mass market paperback Bantam Classic edition of this book. Nothing wrong with it. It's well loved, but there's nothing wrong with it. I got a Penguin Classic though for free, so and it's illustrated on the inside and is a nicer edition that will probably last longer. So, Tale of Two Cities, off it goes. um, Last one that I've already read is the writings, the essential writings, essential quote unquote, the essential writings of Flavius Josephus. Josephus is probably most famous for writing the Jewish War, which is an account of the Jewish revolt in AD 70. But then he also wrote, it's kind of like a digest of Jewish history and the Old Testament for non-Jews called The Antiquities of the Jews. And so if you're a Christian, or obviously if you're a Jew, if you read the Antiquities, a large amount of it will sound very, very familiar because it's a retelling of the Old Testament with some rabbinic tradition kind of sprinkled in. But it comes all the way up to the first century AD, and then the Jewish War is kind of like a follow-up to it. So this is his essential writings. So it's really just parts of the Antiquities and most of the Jewish War. I picked up not too long ago a copy of all of his writings. And so rather than have just those parts of those two, I put the full copy on the shelf, and this is going to go to the store. So, again, nothing wrong with it. I actually really, Josephus is fascinating. He's one of the first writers to mention Jesus, who's not part of the New Testament, for instance. So, that's pretty cool. But then also, the Jewish War in particular is a really cool piece of ancient history. Just opens up a window on things in first century Palestine that you don't get in any other writing from the time period. So, yeah, just a really cool book. Highly recommend Josephus as a something to read. Let's see. How do I want to do this? Let's just do these as a group. It'll be easier. And then we'll do all that together. So, the next three kind of go together. I'll show you the first over here. And they are omnibuses of The Savage Sword of Conan. Savage Sword of Conan was a full-size magazine, black and white comic book style magazine that started, I think, in the 1970s, I think 1975, and was sort of a companion to Marvel Comics' Conan the Barbarian, which was essentially the Conan the Barbarian series was the one that was cool for school, and Savage Sword of Conan is the one that's not cool for school. This is very much an M-rated kind of comic, or an R-rated comic, I guess, particularly in terms of violence. There's a lot of dead bodies. I mean, you could just look at the front cover here. The sword's covered in blood, and there's a bunch of dead people. But then also some other things that are R-rated, which I don't need to spell out for anyone. Now, I'm not getting rid of these because I don't like them. I'm actually getting rid of them because you can see they are chunky. They're huge. I recently acquired PDF copies of this entire series. There are 235 issues of The Savage Sword of Conan, and I got PDFs of them. These books are, number one, really large, and number two, they are really expensive. I found these pretty cheap. I think the most expensive one of these was like $10, but I have seen some of the issues of this large trade paperback. There are 22 of them. I have seen some of them priced at over $100 for just one of these books. So it's an expensive thing to collect. And what sucks about that is even if you collected all of these, you actually don't have the entirety of the Savage Sword of Conan. You only have the comic book portions of the magazine. But the magazine included stories like comics about other characters that Robert E. Howard created, like Cool of Atlantis and Solomon Kane and others. Cormac McArt, for instance, who I talked about in a previous video. Um, but then there were also essays and prose stories that are not included in this. This is just Conan, right? Conan comics. And so these actually aren't the complete thing. They're just reprintings of some of the pages. And so for that reason, they're big. They're really expensive to collect. I'm not going to collect them unless I become substantially more well off than I currently am. It's just they're just not a priority, unfortunately, physically. I mean, I'm still going to read the um, PDFs, but I'm not gonna tackle these. So I like them a lot. I wish that I had all of them. That'd be cool, but I don't, and I'm not going to be collecting them anytime soon. So they are going to go out the door. Nothing wrong with them. They're actually super good. I've read a little bit of Savage Sword and like it a lot, but they're just not a priority right now. So, um, yeah, so that's one stack, or most of one stack of books. Um, I don't know that there's any order to this next stack. I guess those two kind of go together. Yeah, those three kind of go together. Yeah, yeah, we'll do that. Um, so we'll start this stack with a book that will surprise no one who's picked it up before, which is The Sun Also Rises by Ernest Hemingway. I've tried to read one of Hemingway's books before. I think it's A Farewell to Arms that I've tried to read. It's the one about World War One in Italy, which I'm almost certain is Farewell to Arms. Hemingway has a very distinct writing style. And when I was reading Farewell to Arms, it just didn't appeal to me. Just it wasn't for me. But he is widely agreed to be an excellent author, and his books are well regarded by a lot of people. And so I was like, well, this is short. I mean, look, it's not very big. And I was like, I'll give it a shot. I think I got 3 chapters into this book, and I just couldn't. I was like, he writes in a way that I do not appreciate. I understand what he's trying to do. It's very stripped down prose. He's not trying to give you deep, um, explicit impressions of things or explicit. He's not trying to tell you everything. He's trying to give you a bunch of implications and give you the idea of the scene without telling you everything that's in the scene. And that's okay, but especially when it comes to conversations, his conversations just feel really odd and stilted, and um, there's something. It's like listening to a conversation between two people you don't know who are talking about something, but you don't know what it is. It's kind of maddening, and I did not want to do it for an entire book. So I didn't even get to the part. This book is famous for its depiction of bullfighting. I didn't even get to the part about the bullfighting. They didn't even leave France. Begins in France but ends in Spain. I didn't even get to Spain. I was just like, no, I can't. I'm not doing this. So I'm not going to read any more Hemingway either. That was Hemingway's last straw for me. I just said, nope, no more. So, um, yeah, the next one will seem kind of odd, I think, to people who know me. Um, Tim Keller's Preaching, Communicating Faith in an Age of Skepticism. So I like Tim Keller's work. I liked Tim Keller a lot. Fortunately, he's passed away now. But he was a great pastor, a good man, really great example for both pastors and men. And his books are typically pretty good. I've read a couple of his books. Um, read his book on marriage before I got married. There's another one that is escaping me at the moment. This book wasn't even bad. I just kind of decided that it felt introductory. And I don't think that I needed an introduction. That sounds a little bit to my own horn. Um, but essentially, I did not get the sense that I was going to learn a lot about preaching from a book which is not itself preaching, or an individual who has done preaching and can talk to me about it on an individual level. This seemed like it was a mass appeal kind of thing, and I don't need that. I need to sit down with somebody who does it on a regular basis and is good at it, and have them talk to me about it and critique me doing it, for instance. So yeah, so not a bad book by any means. I was reading it and it was good, and he was delving into the scriptures and um quoting lots of other really intelligent people. It's just, this is not the thing that's going to help me become better at preaching, so I decided that it probably wasn't worth the time. But Tim Keller's great, so read Tim Keller. The next one's a real weird, hard turn away from that, um, in so many ways, which is Friedrich Engels's The Condition of the Working Class in England. This is a really famous piece of social critique. Um, Engels, for those of you who don't know, was a co-worker and co-theorist of communism with Karl Marx. Engels basically supported Marx financially when Marx lived in England, because Marx never made any money. And Engels had quite a bit of money, I believe, because he inherited it, which is ironic given his political beliefs. Um, but I guess he was putting it in the service of the masses, so it was fine. I don't know. Certainly he was sharing it, so that's at least in line with his beliefs regarding wealth, I suppose. Um, this is a really famous piece of social critique. I wish I had bookmarked the page. I should have thought about it. I used to, when I taught world history, I used to use part of this book when we talked about the Industrial Revolution. Because as problematic as I think the theory of communism is, Marxist communism specifically is, Engels was not wrong when he pointed out that the working class in England in the Industrial Revolution was deeply disadvantaged, in many ways very oppressed by both the upper classes and just the general structure of society at that time. And he points out a number of critiques of industrial capitalism that I think are actually correct. Um, he points out that it basically eats people alive if you don't fetter capitalism with some restraint and restriction. Adam Smith basically says, listen, if you just allow people to pursue their self-interest, the market will magically regulate itself. Everyone will make the best decisions for them, and ultimately that will mean at a large scale the market will make the best decisions for all the people because it will just regulate itself. Now it's more complicated than that. The Wealth of Nations is a massive book, so I'm not trying to say that that's all that The Wealth of Nations says. But Adam Smith basically argues if people are allowed to pursue their self-interest and government just hands off, everything will work out okay. The Industrial Revolution from about 1780 is really like the very beginnings, up until the turn of the 20th century, I think demonstrates that that's just not true. Um, you have many examples of capitalism that's unfettered and not bound by a lot of regulation. And the result is economic, monetary, and like personal, in many cases, abuse. Um, People die at scale in some of these industrial enterprises. And Adam Smith might say, well, they're just pursuing their self-interest. Well, yeah, they're pursuing their self-interest, but they don't have alternatives, right? Um, and sometimes it is actually not best to think what's good for me, but rather what is good for us. And so Engels chronicles English society, especially Manchester. That's one of the places he focuses on, is the poor parts of Manchester. And there is a segment of this book where he describes the living conditions in Manchester. And it's super evocative. I wish that I had, again, bookmarked it. I'm not going to take the time to find it right now. But he describes these streets that are covered in filth, these tumble down houses, some of them in ruins, some of them burned down, some of them in ruins, but with people living in them. The people are covered in rags and dirty, and it smells. And then he walks down an alleyway in between two houses and he finds this courtyard where there's an open air latrine because there's no door to the latrine. And he says it's overflowing with filth. Just, it's all over the place. There's puddles of it and it's stacked against walls and piled around because there's just, I mean, nobody's going to dig out the latrine. And then he passes on through there and he goes to a bridge and there's a river, I think it's called the Irk, that runs by this part of Manchester. And he says that the river is essentially a solid. Like there's just like a giant sand bar in there, but it's not sand. It's industrial runoff and human waste. And it's just solidified. And the river either runs underneath it or kind of flows over it really slowly and grossly and brownishly. Um, so he makes, I think, a lot of really good critiques. And that's why I used it as a primary source when I taught world history, because I think in large part he is correct about what industrialized capitalist society does to the working class. What he was incorrect about is everything else. The solution is not, as he says at the end of this book, I didn't notice this until today. Here we go. He says, this is the final paragraph. If we have not advanced enough proof to justify the conclusions we have drawn, we hope to have another opportunity of showing that these conclusions follow inevitably from an examination of the history of England. But I stick to what I have already said. The war of poor against rich in England, which is already being waged by individuals and also by all the workers by indirect means, will, before long, be openly waged by the whole of the proletariat. It's too late for the parties concerned to reach a peaceful solution. The gulf between the two classes is becoming wider and wider. The workers are becoming more and more imbued with the spirit of resistance. The feelings of the proletariat against their oppressors are becoming more and more bitter. The workers are moving from minor guerrilla skirmishes to demonstrations and armed conflicts of a more serious nature. Soon it will be necessary to dislodge a stone, and the whole avalanche will be set in motion. When the cry echoes throughout the country, war to the mansion, peace to the cottage, then it will be too late for the wealthy to save their skins. So he's just advocating violent revolution. He basically says peaceful means don't work. Kill them all. There is very little there that someone like Mao Zedong would have disagreed with. I mean, that's what Mao did, is put the aristocrats to death. That's what Joe Stalin did. That's what Lenin did. And so that's where this philosophy of Marxist communism goes wrong, is in saying there is no peaceful solution to this problem. We're just going to have to kill the people who are in the way. And I think that's bad. I certainly don't think it's Christian. I don't even think it's moral. I don't think that even if you're not a Christian or some sort of ethical monotheist, I still don't think that you can say, well, that's the way to do this. No. So I think that is the poison at the heart of Marxist communism, is not the idea that maybe property should be held commonly. There are other forms of communism where that's not a problem. There are forms of Christian communism where people hold goods in common. So that's not the issue, right? Ownership of stuff is not the issue. It can be an issue, but it's not the issue. The issue is, how do we solve our differences economically? Do we solve them through reasoned debate or redistribution of some kind? Or do we solve them by killing the people who seem to be the issue? And I just don't think that killing people is the answer. So, call me crazy. The next one, I laugh at myself for this. So, I'm getting rid of this next one, the next two actually, for two reasons. Number one, Faustus, Dr. Faustus, by Christopher Marlowe. It did not occur to me that this was a play. when I picked it up. I picked this up for free. Um, and it did not occur to me. I know who Christopher Marlowe is. I know that he's a contemporary of Shakespeare. I know that they both wrote plays. Did not occur to me. Dr. Faustus is going to be a play. It also didn't occur to me that I had two of them, the first edition and the second edition. And they're both plays. I don't like reading plays on the page. I don't think they translate well. Um, the only plays that I've ever read that I thought were a good reading experience from page are some Shakespeare. Macbeth, for instance, still works on the page. And then some ancient Greek stuff. I've read some Euripides, like Medea, that still work on the page. You do need some context. You need to understand what you're reading and kind of have a sense of what somebody needs to tell you what the play looks like when it's staged, or you need to have an idea of that. But it works pretty well. Um, I just don't want to take the time to find out if this works pretty well. And I'll be honest, I definitely don't want to do it twice. So, yeah. So these are going out the door. Um, if I just read things, you would think on a show about reading that it wouldn't be a problem. But if I just read things, maybe this wouldn't happen so often. But it does. Yeah. The last four are all in the same general category, which is philosophy. Um, Philosophy is something that I'm interested in. I have a minor in it, actually. But I find that I'm interested in it in what I would say is a pedestrian way. Um, I'm not interested in it in an academic sense. I think academic philosophy is boring as heck. And reading about it is even more boring. It's not that I don't think it's important. I do. It's just that I hate doing it. I hate reading it. And so, although there are some philosophical works that I'm like, oh, I'll give it a shot and read that. And there are some that I've, gotten some stuff out of, and enjoyed, especially when you talk about it with somebody else. Um, these four that I'm about to show you are just not ones that I'm going to talk about with somebody else, and not ones that I want to commit the time to. So I'm not going to. The first one is The Idea of History by R.G. Collingwood. Collingwood was a historian and philosopher at Oxford in the 19th century, I believe, a while ago. And he wrote a lot on the philosophy of history. What is history? How do you do it? What can you actually know? What can you learn? Um, how does what we say about the past actually line up with reality? And so it's important stuff if you're going to be a historian and write history. It's important stuff for you to consider. I don't know that it actually impacts the writing of a historical work all that often, but it's important to think about at the very least to say, all right, well, what do I think this person talking about the past in this primary source, what do I think they're actually telling me? How do I know that what they're saying is true? Um, so it's good. The problem is this book is huge. The text is tiny. This is almost 500 pages long, and the text is tiny. And philosophy is just a lot of it. This kind, it's just boring. To be quite honest, I just find it boring. And maybe that just speaks to a pedestrian turn of mind in me, but I find it boring. So I'm just not going to take the time to deal. Just not going to do it. The next one is a very famous piece of work by a very famous person, and that would be Thus Spoke Zarathustra by Friedrich Nietzsche. I read a little bit of this book this morning. I honestly just don't like the style. Part of it, I think, is that it's translated obviously from German. Um, it's written in like a faux biblical style, so it sounds similar to maybe like the gospel accounts. Zarathustra if you don't know, is one way of saying or spelling or pronouncing the name of the prophet Zoroaster. Zoroaster was an ancient Persian who founded the religion of Zoroastrianism, which is essentially the idea that there are two co-equal forces in the universe, one being the forces of light and good, which is personified in the figure Ahura Mazda, and then the forces of evil and destruction and darkness, which are personified in the figure Ahriman. And those two do battle over all of cosmic history. And at the end, one of them will triumph. I don't think it's ever clear which one. I think Zoroaster basically was making the case like, hey, you should be on the side of good because it's good, not on the side of bad because it's bad. There are some issues with good and evil being equally powerful, which I'm not going to get into here because it's not even really the point of this book. But that's what Zoroastrianism is. That's who Zoroaster or Zarathustra is. Nietzsche took Zarathustra as a figure, dispenser of wisdom, and basically has him come down from a mountain after a religious experience in his book and then explain to people and preach to people what he has learned or figured out or divined or been enlightened with. What he's been enlightened with is Nietzsche's own philosophy of what's called the Übermensch. How to do Nietzscheanism in less than 5 minutes. Basically, Nietzsche thought that mankind had, with Christianity particularly, indulged in a slave mentality. Christianity privileges things. It's here on the back of the book, the way it's, yeah. Christianity privileges things like humility, meekness, poverty, and altruism. Okay? Which, yeah, for sure. That's good. Those are all good. 10 out of 10. And Nietzsche ultimately thought that that was not actually good for humanity. He thought, as I said, that's effectively a slave mentality, is what I think he would have called it. You're doing things that don't make sense for your own survival, or really for the good of society generally. For instance, he would have said altruism allows people who wouldn't otherwise survive to survive. It's kind of bad. And it keeps you from being all you can be. He would have been a big fan of the U.S. Army, I guess. He was actually more a fan of the ancient Greek understanding of what goodness was, things like nobility, pride, and victory. So he thought that the regular common run of humanity, essentially, and he says it in the first couple pages, I believe it's in the first couple pages, but he says essentially the way that regular people look at apes is the way that the Übermensch, or Superman, looks at regular people. That essentially the Übermensch is like an evolutionary step above the common run of humanity, and it's the destiny of some members of humanity to basically be that Superman, and to be prideful and victorious and noble and better than other people through their own strength and that sort of thing. So Nietzsche has this very, like, go out there and fight the elements and be strong kind of philosophy, which will, temper you like steel and turn you into an Übermensch, or you'll die, and then obviously you weren't meant to be an Übermensch. It's not a very happy philosophy. He says in the first couple pages that God is dead. In other words, religion's kind of this sheen or facade that you shouldn't actually give into because it's misleading you. It's not going to help you ultimately. This philosophy gets picked up by the Nazis, and they take it in a different direction. Nietzsche was not in favor of, mass death or something like that. He was not a totalitarian. And the Nazis are like, great, we're going to do this at scale for other people without their consent. Nietzsche really didn't that was not his view. So he was not a Nazi. He was not one of those guys. And would, I think, actually probably have abhorred what they were doing. But to the extent that, human weakness dies out because weak people die out, I think he would have been fine with it. I just didn't want to read this, to be quite honest. It just was going to be a slog. And I disagree with Nietzsche's philosophy, so I'm not going to read it. Last two here. This is a book from the Everyman's Library, Chinese Philosophy in Classical Times. Everyman's Library is a cool imprint. I actually like these little books a lot. The problem, I realized, again, if you'd only read the books, John, this is not a history of philosophy, Chinese philosophy in classical times. It's excerpts from Chinese philosophy in classical times. So it's excerpts from like 40 or 50 different classical Chinese philosophical texts. But it's not the whole thing. The whole point of reading a philosophical text is getting all the context for someone's ideas. This is not going to be helpful to me. Maybe for somebody, but not for me. So, yeah, after taking a close look at it and realizing exactly what I was looking at, it's just like, that's okay. I'll be fine without it. And then the last one, people who know me and are like me are going to be sad at this, but the last one is Purity of Heart is to Will One Thing by Soren Kierkegaard. He's a Christian existentialist. He basically thinks all of life lacks meaning except because God. And so he's got some really dour and sad philosophical musings. This is, I think, one of his more famous short works. I know, actually, that it is. In reading it, or reading part of it, yeah, it just, tonally, I knew that it was going to be a slog. He even says in the introduction, hey, you're going to have to read this book a lot out loud, multiple times, and just sit with the sentences. I don't really prefer to do that with books that aren't the Bible, just to be really honest. And I'm confident that God did some good stuff through Soren Kierkegaard, and that's great. But I don't want to sit with this book and read it multiple times. So I'm not going to. And it was free. I got it for free. So I'm not losing anything by sending it off and letting somebody else who actually does want to sit with it and think about it and mark it up and all that. I'm doing the world a favor by releasing this one into the wild. So Purity of Heart is to Will One Thing by Soren Kierkegaard. So that whole stack there, plus the book that I'm currently reading, which I think I mentioned before, is what's it called? The Mists of Doom. Cormac McCartan, The Mists of Doom. All of that brings my physical to be read list number down to, I should have written it on a piece of paper. That's more exciting. Too late now. 722. So chipping away. That's a whole 20-some books that are now out the door, or about to be out the door. So, yeah, making progress. Gonna be a minute, but making some progress, and hopefully we'll continue to make some leaps and bounds. We'll see what happens. But man, this is longer than I thought it was gonna be. So see you next time. Probably in a book review.